welcome our next presenter, which is, Tracy Douglas from University of Tasmania, and she'll be coming on soon. And while Tracy's coming on, another fact for you. So the Canary Islands named after dogs, not birds. More you know. Hi, Tracy.
Hi, how are you going?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Right, I will just share. Hopefully you can see my presentation now.
Yep, too easy.
Yep,
Cheers.
excellent. So thanks for that, and thanks Ash and Ryan for some really interesting presentations this morning. What I'm going to be talking about today is how we actually transformed active learning in first year anatomy and physiology units in response to the pandemic this year. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the unit was like previously and then what we did this year, particularly using LT. So this anatomy and physiology units are taught across 2 campuses. They essentially have a number of different courses in them. They're first year students, so we have about 200 to 250 students, and we develop them as flipped units. And so we have a lot of core content online. It's delivered in lots of different formats, and that's to address the diversity of our learners, but we have a lot of formative assessment embedded into the online content. So the students engage with the online content, and then they come on campus in a traditional education year. The active learning workshops are held in lecture theatres. They're 2 hours. The students get to interact, do a lot of activities to apply the learning of what they've looked at online. And they also do Kahoot quizzes, which is the most popular thing that we have in our active learning workshops. The students then also attend a 2-hour practical, which they attend a laboratory. There may be an anatomy laboratory or a physiology laboratory, and that sometimes incorporates a tutorial as well. And we have been utilising LT and Power Labs in a lot of the physiology practicals in both the first semester and second semester unit. We also use online discussion boards in this unit so that we've got a lot of asynchronous communication occurring between students and also students and teachers. And we assessed traditionally online using some module quizzes. So the students were getting some easy low stakes assessment through the unit. There's an assignment linked to one of their pracs in physiology. And then they had really high stakes tests and examinations to complete. Then in 2020, week 3 of semester 1, COVID-19 appeared. COVID-19 therefore caused lockdown to occur in Australia, and that included Tasmania locking down first as the island state, and so our lecture theatres now became empty. That meant that we were forced to be at home. Our students were at home, we were at home, and we're all feeling quite isolated. We're also feeling very frustrated and unsure where we were going on our educational journeys. We were dealing with first years. These first years had 3 years contact, not much transition to university, and now we'd thrown them into an online environment. They were praying and we were praying as well. But through collaboration with a number of things, including AD instruments using LT, we hopefully were able to provide them with a good experience. So what did we do? Well, obviously we used what we had in our learning management system. Our learning management system had web conferencing available, so we tried to move a lot of things to that. We also, of course, had access to LT because we had a subscription with AD instruments. We also now had access to more because we didn't have a subscription to the anatomy practical components, but we could now have a look at what was there and see if that was useful for us. So we started to develop all the practicals online as quickly as we could to deliver them to students according to their weekly schedule. We organised some drop-in sessions in web conferencing to sort of collaborate with the students as they were doing some of these practicals and help them out as they could. And this was quite hard because we couldn't actually timetable these effectively. We'd also had to think about how we were assessing the assignment in the unit because that was linked to one of the normal face-to-face physiology practicals where students were collecting data, but now we were using an online form. So the anatomy and physiology practicals in LT were really important for us to now try to develop a really active learning environment, but the students were going to be very much on their own doing this, and they were going to be doing it asynchronously because we wanted to build in flexibility. So we initially released the Introduction to LT lesson to the students so they could become familiar with the LT platform, and we ensured that we were in web conferencing to assist them with any questions about this. We set up pre-lab lessons for the physiology practicals. These were optional, but students could then try and assess some of the basic knowledge that they'd hopefully incorporated through the other lessons so that they could see if they were ready to actually embark on the LT practical. Our anatomy material was imported into LT. We looked at some of the information that was already in an existing anatomy material, and we sort of migrated stuff and worked it so that it was really targeting the practical exam that the students would do at the end of the semester. And my colleague, Jamie Chapman, he was responsible for doing the anatomy side, and he spent a lot of time making these practicals as interactive as possible for students, and they loved them because they got immediate feedback on their questions, and they labelled things and they matched things, and they did lots of those wonderful activities that others have talked about in their presentations in the LT platform. The physiology practicals were set up. We did have some already set up, so we just had to now make them on an online form, and that was a little bit hard. So we kind of put in things like, if you're in the laboratory, this is what you would have done. So this is the data that you will get, and hopefully the students were able to follow that effectively. So we used some imported data from 8 instruments, but also some of our own data, and we tried to get students to analyse the data and answer the questions effectively. We embedded videos and instructions as much as possible. We provided questions of different types, so those annotation ones, the matching ones, multiple choice, short answer ones. Some of these they got immediate feedback on, others they didn't because they might be linked to the assessment. Revision modules were really important, and Dee talked about this yesterday, how some concepts in physiology are so difficult, and so we did look at how we could just put in some extra lessons in LT on things like the cardiac cycle, and the students who engaged in those found those really useful. And the assignment task, of course, was linked to 2 physiology pracs, and the students did have choice on which one they actually did for the assessment. So, did the students engage? Well, if we look at the anatomy practicals this year that we put all online in the end in the semester 1 unit, the lowest percent engagement we had was 71%, the highest was 80%. We tended to get less engagement as the semester went on. In semester 2, it was a little bit lower towards the end, and we're not really sure what that was, but it's fairly similar. The engagement with the physiology practice isn't quite as good as the anatomy, and it's because the students probably saw the anatomy practice as really important for their practical exam, which is where they have to identify anatomical structures. Whereas the physiology practice is important for the assignment, but that isn't linked to all the pracs. So particularly in semester 2, our final prac, week 13, they're really tired. They're only 27% of them engaged with that practical. In the revision lessons that we provided, we did get an indication that students really did find their learning was enhanced, and I did use questions similar to what Ash has just been talking about to actually test, whether the students felt they'd learned anything from where they were at the beginning to the end of the lesson. Their assignment performance wasn't really affected by us going fully online. Our average marks in the respiratory and digestive assignment in this semester we've just finished was pretty similar. Interestingly, though, more students failed the digestive assignment. I think that's because they didn't actually finish the LT prac when I actually looked at their performance in it. And so they probably didn't actually manage to collect the data that they really needed to answer the questions effectively. So we need to work on really engaging them in the online space. So what did the students think? We've done a bit of a survey of the students just at the end of this semester, and certainly the students do find the physiology pracs in LT are relatively easy to complete, and they do feel generally that they enhance their learning. They even more so like the anatomy pracs. And so I think this was not surprising to us because we do appreciate that it's really hard for them to engage in the physiology without us actually there all the time synchronously to assist them. When we asked them if they prefer the pracs to stay on campus or off campus in the future, 45% definitely want on campus, 50% were undecided. We think that's because they'd probably like a mixture of both. And then there were just the 5% who definitely were happy with the online version. So what did they like? We gave them the opportunity to give us some commentary on what they liked or what they didn't like about the LT practicals, and they overwhelmingly love the fact that it's flexible. They're asynchronous, they can do them at their own pace, they can make sure that they're taking their own notes, and they can do part of the prac one day, finish the prac the next day, so they can very much work it around their other commitments, and a lot of them love that. They really love the anatomy pracs and the fact that they get instant feedback on their answers as they're completing the practical material. Our visual learners, of which we have many in our courses, really loved the pracs overall and love the fact we connect anatomy with physiology, so we don't silo them as individual practicals. We do have some crossover between the two because anatomy is taught from a functional perspective in many cases. And there was a lot of overwhelming comments that say, yep, both on campus and off campus practicals would be really good to strengthen our learning in this unit. So what they didn't like was that they weren't able to ask questions. So we weren't often online when they were working through their practicals because they were doing it at a time that suited them, and they couldn't interact with their peers very easily. They did find the physiology pracs more difficult because it was all self-directed. The anatomy they did find a lot easier. And they didn't like the fact that in the physiology pracs, they didn't always get immediate feedback on their answers. And that's probably because we didn't communicate particularly well, that sometimes the answers weren't given because they were going to appear in the assignment, which was an assessment task in the unit. This student comment was probably one that really summed up a lot of how our students as first year students felt after this year. They felt that the LT practicals were a good replacement for the situation we were in, which was the pandemic. They did feel that they could be quite time consuming and didn't actually give them that hands-on experience that they really like in the lab. But they were appreciative of what we'd actually been trying to achieve. And I guess that comes back to even what Ryan was saying. You know, we try and do the best we can this year, particularly when we've all been, you know, working off the back foot and trying to do things as quickly as we can and just in time for our students. But certainly our students did appreciate it. And I think, you know, moving forward, we certainly take that on and look at how we can improve the online environment as well as bringing them back on campus. So finally, just to think about where we go in 2021 when we still might be in a pandemic or it may be post-pandemic, we will be retaining our online practicals and improving them, but we also have the opportunity to bring our students back face-to-face for weekly practicals in semester 1 next year at this stage. So we'll certainly be doing a hybrid model. We will certainly use web conferencing to try and support the online practicals more effectively and continue to develop some revision modules for using LT, incorporating formative feedback, because we think the students find these really useful, particularly in physiology. So I'd just like to acknowledge my co-coordinator, Dr. Jamie Chapman, and my wonderful technical staff, Mandy and Georgie, who assist in developing the LT material for this unit and made it as successful as it was, and also the support from AD Instruments, particularly Liam, who's always been there when we need him. So thanks for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions now or in the social session later.
Awesome. Cheers, Tracy. Should have time just for one question from Sanjay, which is, how do you ensure exam security during the summative assessments?
Yeah, so we have a lockdown content browsers, but not with cameras, that we're able to use for our internal assessments. But our university decided not to allow them any sort of content lockdown browsers to be used for our final assessments in this assessment we've just gone, unless we had to prove that it needed to be done for accreditation reasons. So what we've really done is work hard to ensure that when it's a multiple choice part of the exam, or in the case of practical exam, it was images that they had to name the labels, they're very time limited. So they really had to know their stuff to get through the material. And also there was randomization of questions. So different students didn't get the same questions. And then the section B was done an assignment, which was their short answer section. Again, it was time limited, but we tried to use applied questions rather than regurgitation questions. So it was all about really good design of questions to try and ensure the students weren't just regurgitating knowledge. And then we put the assignment questions through Turnitin, and we actually didn't have any matching from any of the 200 students in our unit. There was none of them that came up as potential plagiarism. So we just really reinforced to them that it was important. So.
Nice, that's really good. Yeah, I know there's some integrity issues at other places, so that was cool.
Yeah, there are lots. Yeah, it's a big area.
Awesome. Cool. Cheers, Tracy. So yeah, that's all time we have. So I need to switch to the next presenter, which is Tina Hinton from the University of Sydney, also in Australia. So thanks again.